Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. Story number 1. Exchangeable Parts, written by Zentaps. Many stories exist of humans who are somehow able to invent their way out of impossible scenarios. Ships repaired from catastrophic damages. Prisoners engineering an escape vehicle from spare parts. Soldiers who jerry-rig equipment in the field to win battles. Even just that random human down the street who can repair junk into working equipment. What gets lost in the retellings is one fact about human technology: standardization of exchangeable parts. The concept of parts being identical and interchangeable. This concept is reflected in the construction of their devices. The same tube that connects a water pipeline to a reactor core might very well be the same size as the one that feeds into the washing machine. A damaged heating coil in a spacesuit might have a close cousin in the electric kettle. What follows are some vignettes that exemplify the utility that standardization grants. When a blackout cut the power to the city hospital, there was a crisis almost immediately. Dozens of patients were at risk if power couldn't be restored soon. The backup generators failed almost immediately. A bad wiring sparked a fire that was quickly put out before things went terribly wrong. In a bid that was both brilliant and desperate, the hospital staff enlisted near everyone they could to plug the generators for their vehicle into the hospital grid. Cables stretched across the parking lot in through from the front door, and coils snaked through the ground floor windows and pooling beside the hospital's power substation. On the roof, the hospital's 3 rescue vehicles idled, pumping power. It was just enough to sustain the bare necessities. When power was restored, the hospital declared that no casualties had been sustained, which was met with cheers. When the military depot on Corridor 4 was suddenly under threat of invasion from the Drell, it found itself short of fighter craft. Many of the defensive craft damaged in the initial attacks. In an unusual move, the decision was made to strip the land vehicles for parts to repair wounded planes. Holes patched with deck plating, shield generators from tank refits for a fighter craft housing. As a result, Corridor was able to field an impressive air defense, which bravely fought off the invasion fleet. However, early ground invasion elements had already landed and were moving to destroy key military positions. In one of the fastest turnarounds, the fighter craft were landed, stripped of their parts to restore the plundered land vehicles, which then raced off to intercept the enemy force. It was an astounding feat, one which saw crews crawling over still melting armor plates to pick out components to facilitate repairs. When the passenger liner Molten Streamer's reactor suffered a core breach, it was lucky enough to be in the range of a nearby planet. Though the planet was unoccupied, it did have an old marine base from the fortress walls orbiting around it. Engineers from the Molten Streamer made a quick shuttle trip to the salvaged materials and parts that they could from the old relic. Standards back then had largely remained in place, and the engineers were after some time able to identify similar parts in the housing of the powered-down base reactor. Though, to the irritation of the engineers, the power cables had a lower max power specification than their own. In the end, the Molten Streamer's crew were not only able to repair the damage to the ship, but also fix a long-broken coffee machine. End of story. Story number 2. Tit for Tat, written by ___________. Terry was getting tired of everyone's crap. She couldn't go a day without someone messing with her food or drink. They tried to tamper with the climate control of her quarters, but she locked that down fast. Terry could understand if the skullduggery and shenanigans were a product of her own machinations or her people's, but it wasn't. For whatever reason, that made it all the more frustrating to her. At least they were learning. She wasn't allowed exposed flame, but they didn't try to feed her methanol anymore either. Totally worth it. Now they checked relevant medical data before trying to sneak things into her consumables. They weren't the sharpest tools in the shed when it came to covering their digital tracks either. At first, Terry thought that she'd have to design and implement an algorithm to feed the medical intelligence, but it wasn't necessary. The medical intelligence was there to help and safeguard the crew, after all. so she only had to request notification if any of the crew had inquired about planet Earth, humans in particular. Granted, there was that one time being from a mythically deadly environment was quite convenient. Her fellow crew stopped asking about sex and asked her for sexual favors after she disseminated a compilation of traditional human mating procedures. She decided she couldn't go wrong with clips from the classics Event Horizon and Hellraiser. Murder, fecking, and grotesque mutilations weren't high up on anyone's fetish list, which was nice. At least the genuine questions weren't too bad. Terry would take a question and answer session over tests any day. Most of them would go glossy-eyed rather quickly, especially when it turned out the answer to mythical human endurance was due to technology and societal relations. It wasn't as cool as the humans were resilient due to medical technology, and because humans nurtured their own. Everyone wanted to hear stories about walking juggernauts unable to die. It was disappointing to learn that those sorts of humans were a few and far between. That what made those humans unique was their social skills, not their ability to wade through lava. Because that's how intelligent life survived on so-called death worlds. Social adaptation, not Godzilla-style domination. Humans embodied the phrase, work smart, not hard. With a grin, Terry made some notes. Godzilla would be a great movie night. She'd get a new slew of questions and tests, but for the G-Man, it would be worth it. Horror movies and kaiju always seemed to be a big hit with the crew. If screaming in terror and running away from the auditorium could be considered a big hit, Terry considered it the biggest of hits. End of story. Story number 3. When I think about the humans, I don't think of war. Written by Despair. I don't think any of my people do. Oh sure, we hear the stories, and I have no doubt they're true. I imagine what I know turned towards destruction, and I shudder. But about 30 standard years ago, my species got hit with the worst luck in the galaxy. A highly contagious disease, deadly, naturally evolved superplague. Multicellular microorganism, so our standard drugs didn't affect it, and so fast mutating that our immune system couldn't get a grip on it. It didn't look like anything would slow it down until it ran low on hosts. We put out a general distress call, but not many responded. Our treaty-bound allies to put up a military screen to keep our opportunistic raiders, but I doubt any would have crossed the quarantine warnings. A few of the more charitable high-tech civs space-dropped self-contained water purifiers, power cells, home nanoassemblers, and things like that. Useful stuff for the survivors of a civilization collapse. If there were any survivors. None of the stuff helped with that. The humans sent a fleet. I say the humans, but it is a bit more complicated than that. Everybody knows that humans practice capitalism, and anybody who's dealt with their merchants knows they're good at it. And, of course, they have a government. But this fleet was neither government nor for profit. It was from a human order called Healers Unstoppable. Or at least, that's how my translator rendered it. It was a group of human healers who had declared the civilization-wrecking plagues were not going to happen and set out to enforce it. They landed and started setting up field hospitals. Now, that's crazy for 2 reasons. First, nobody knew if the disease could jump species or not. Quarantine can't really hold in those conditions. Every one of them would easily have died just from setting foot on our world. Second, who studies xenomedicine? Learning the biology of one species takes years of hard work. 2 might be doable if you're long-lived, but somehow human doctors are trained to provide basic medicine to every known sentient species. I asked one about it later, and she said, after the 3rd or 4th, it gets easier. Crazy. Our infrastructure was pretty much in shambles by then. Didn't intimidate them at all. They just pulled out a checklist of things they needed and either plugged into us or space dropped it. They'd refined their procedures down to the checklists. I'm almost asked how many crises they'd jumped into to get to that point, but I decided that I didn't want to know. And they weren't just treating patients. They were taking samples of the pathogen, sequencing them, and uploading to interstellar medical databases. As a lot of us thought, what's the point? Ours is the only planet where life uses hydrocarbon polymer genomics. and our bioinformaticists are dead. Nobody can use this data. Well, if you read this far, you can probably guess that it was the humans again. Specifically, it was some human on Earth whose day job was a database programming, but did biostatistics as a hobby. He ran machine learning over the sequences using his employer's computers. Apparently, they didn't care, and found some highly conserved surface receptors. He recognized surface transport codes because he'd studied our genetic systems. He studied dozens of different genetic systems. He said, "They're interesting." That was the insight the healer's unstoppable folks needed. Within hours, they had designed a cure and a vaccine. There are species out there that are better biostatistics than the humans, but they do what they need. Only the humans do it for fun. So only humans do it in biomysteries they've hardly ever dealt with. And only humans look at the plague devastating a faraway world that they have no ties to and say, "We're not letting that happen." We wouldn't be here today without them. That's what humanity means to my people. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons: Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Parky, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian.